For 3 months, the new regime in Damascus has used every opportunity to say it does not want a fight with Israel. The governor of Damascus, Maher Marwan, told the US broadcaster National Public Radio, "We have no fear towards Israel, and our problem is not with Israel." The message has been reinforced by Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sham. He told the Times of London, "We do not want any conflict, whether with Israel or with anyone else, and we will not let Syria be used as a launchpad for attack." 2 days after the appointment of President Bashar, he told The Economist, "We want peace with all parties, although it would be premature to normalise relations with Israel as the occupation of the Golan Heights continues." Israel, on the other hand, took these multiple peace offerings as a sign of weakness, spurring ever bolder and more belligerent action. Long before the rebel army takeover, Israel had been plotting to divide their neighbour's country into three: the Kurds in the north, the Druze in the south, and Bashar al-Assad in charge of a rump Alawite state, funded by the Emiratis, on condition, of course, that he kicks out the Iranian and Hezbollah fighters. When it became clear that Assad couldn't hold back Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, Israel switched to Plan B. It unilaterally declared a mission to support the Druze and the Kurds. Without pausing for breath, Israeli jets destroyed Syria's navy and its heavy weaponry in a series of devastating airstrikes which continue to this day. After seizing Mount Hermon and an area greater than Gaza, Defense Minister Israel Katz said that Israeli military forces were preparing for a long stay. Initially, security officials quoted in the Israeli media talked of establishing in Syria a 15-kilometre demilitarised zone and a 60-kilometre zone of influence, where potential threats could be monitored. But the Israelis were still being coy about their territorial ambitions, which extended far beyond their border. A week ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu brazenly demanded the complete demilitarization of southern Syria from the forces of the regime in Damascus. In this new demand, he's going further than the status quo he's trying to achieve in southern Lebanon, where Israel recognizes the Lebanese army. In Syria, Israel refuses to recognize the military forces of the post-Assad government. But even his words could be an understatement. The true scope of Israel's military adventurism could be to create a state that runs the full length of the border of the Golan Heights, along the south of Syria, and then up to the Kurdish-controlled northeast. Ahmed Shara is increasingly finding it difficult to establish his control of a united and sovereign land. The Kurds not only control a third of Syria's territory, but its best oil fields, farmland, and a dam that feeds electricity to the east. 1/3 of the housing stock has been destroyed in the civil war, and 90% of Syria's population is living below the poverty line. The government is broke and couldn't pay the salaries of its workers in January. There's no money either coming from the Gulf. Doha is delaying a much-needed infusion of cash because of uncertainty over US sanctions. And without Syria being allowed to join the SWIFT banking system, billions of dollars needed cannot arrive. Meanwhile, Israel is doing its best to ensure the international sanctions remain in place. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar had the temerity to lecture his 20 EU counterparts at a recent meeting on why Europe should not place its trust in the new government in Syria. "I hear talks about a transition in Syria," Saar said. "This is ridiculous. The new government is a jihadist, Islamist terror group from Idlib." He said a stable Syria could only be a federal one. The same, of course, could be applied to his own country, Israel. But who is an Israeli minister to dictate how a neighbouring country should be run? And by what right is Israel trying to shape the future and limit the sovereignty of the most independent and important Arab country on its immediate border area? Is it because of the biblical claim to an area that extends from Damascus to the Euphrates to the Nile, or simply because Israel now thinks it can? I fancy this has nothing to do with the Bible and everything to do with brute force. But when Shara looks around him, what his state lacks most of all is a functional army. He has around 30,000 fighters who are spread thinly around the entire land. Syria's heavy weaponry, its tanks, air force, artillery, missiles and radars have all been knocked out. The only neighbour that will provide Syria with the ability to defend itself is Turkey. Bashar and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan have discussed a defence pact, but progress is painfully slow compared with the speed at which Israel is establishing facts on the ground on Syrian territory. Both Ankara and Damascus are cautious. Initially, the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan used every speech to say that Turkey sought a partnership of equals and would not use Syria as a proxy. But that caution is rapidly going. Fidan gave Israel a clear warning last week, saying Syria's territorial integrity was a red line for Turkey. He said, any attempt to divide it, whether through the PKK control or Israeli intervention, will only create further instability. A stable and sovereign Syria is indeed a Turkish national security requirement. Damascus's need to regain control over all its territory and Turkey's need to have a stable border and a stable Syria are intimately linked. It is no accident of timing that the PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan, who has been in prison since 1999, has now made his long-awaited call on the group that he founded to lay down its arms. The last thing Ankara needs at this delicate point in attempts to end an insurgency that has lasted for decades is for Israel to stick its nose into Kurdish affairs. There are powerful domestic reasons why Turkey's posture towards Israeli incursions into Syria will harden, not the least of which is to see 3 million registered Syrian refugees return home. What is more curious than the caution with which Turkey is treading its path as a regional power is the reluctance of the new regime in Damascus to seek Turkish military help. There are historical reasons for a degree of distance between the HTS and Turkey. Relations between the two in Idlib were not always rosy, especially when the HTS clashed with other armed groups supported by Turkey. Turkey, on the other hand, cooperated with the HTS, but not always as the group wanted. That's not the only bump in the road to a fully fledged security pact. Damascus remains optimistic about restoring relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. This is a mistake, as Damascus will soon find out. Abu Dhabi was engaged in Plan A, which was to keep Assad in power, but to buy him off at the cost of expelling the Iranian Revolutionary Guards from Syria and Hezbollah. This was essentially Israel's agenda, to neutralise Syria by dividing it into cantons. Opinion at home is changing as well. The new government has to show it's in control of its own land. Without that, it will not be taken seriously by the many elements and forces that could yet undermine it. The Syrian Druze are not the playthings of Israel that the Palestinian Druze became after 1948. Firstly, 3 provinces of Syria's south are ethnically mixed. Secondly, tribal opinion matters. Netanyahu's statement that he would not allow the HTS or the new Syrian army to enter the area south of Damascus was met with widespread anger across Syria, particularly in the south. Druze protesters held a demonstration in Sueda, carrying banners that rejected Israel's encroachment in their region, with one placard describing Syrian law as the people's protector and the guarantor of their rights. Bashar has only a limited amount of time in which he can continue with his current policy of turning the other cheek. Unlike King Faisal, over a century ago, who led the Arab revolt against the Ottomans only to be double-crossed by the British and the French, who had their own plans for dividing up the spoils of the fallen empire, Bashar does have the support of a strong state and a strong army. He should use it. Israel is the biggest enemy to a unified, sovereign and independent Syria. Israel is also a mortal threat to Bashar himself and the new government. Its border with Syria has been quiet for decades, and yet it is acting swiftly to create facts on the ground. Netanyahu and Katz instructed the Israeli military on Saturday to prepare to defend the majority Druze city of Jaramana in the suburbs of Damascus. And the latest news is that Syrian government security forces have now entered Jaramana. On the vehicles are the flags of the Druze community. With or without the Abraham Accords, Israel is acting like a hegemon. It has to be faced down in Syria, and soon.